So hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Yale College Voices, where we delve into the diverse and inspiring narratives that shape the Yale College experience. And I'm thrilled to have my distinguished guest with me today, someone who plays a pivotal role in guiding and shaping the academic journeys of countless students. So today we have Kristin McJunkins. So welcome, Kristin.
Thank you for having me, Darice.
My pleasure. I'm so happy to have you here. So I'm just going to read your bio and then we'll, just chit chat and have a great conversation. So we're going to explore Kristin's professional journey and her commitment to DEIB within academic advising and the dynamic landscape of health and medical education. In 2004, Kristin joined Johns Hopkins University as a pre-health and pre-law advisor, and since 2006 has worked with Yale University. So Kristin now serves as Director of Advanced Degree Applications and STEM Career Advising, where she oversees advising and counseling for Yale College undergraduates and alumni, as well as students from the Graduate School of Arts and Sciences, interested in pursuing further education in the health and medical fields. So a longtime higher education professional, Kristin began her career handling event planning and facilities management at Widener University, where she obtained a BS in business administration and master's in education. And then transitioning to advising services at the University of Pennsylvania, she coordinated the peer faculty advising program for 1,600 first-year undergraduates, as well as managed services for first-year students and sophomores in the College of Arts and Sciences. So Kristin is also an active member of the National and Northeast Associations for Advisors in the Health Professions, the Global Community for Academic Advising, the National and Eastern Associations of Colleges and Employers, and also Northeast Association for Pre-Law Advisors. So thank you, Kristin. It's so nice to have you here today.
It's so weird to hear your bio read back to you.
I know, right? And it's amazing. So I'm wondering if we could just start off, tell me a little bit more about how you got into this field, your college years. What drew you to this area?
I think with many people, at least with myself, a lot of it was a happy accident.
Really?
I actually started college. I grew up in Rhode Island and started college at the University of Rhode Island, which was a much larger state institution. Mm-hmm. And I was unsure of what I wanted to major in and had a good experience, but decided to take a year out of college and worked. Oh, wow. And throughout that, really thought about what I wanted and valued in college. And I really, for myself, felt a smaller environment was better. Mm-hmm. And Widener is just outside of Philadelphia. So it was about 5 hours away. Mm-hmm. So it was close enough to get home, yes. But felt like you were away from where you grew up. Mm-hmm. And it was a great experience. Really? And one of the first job that I got was as a student manager within the college union. Oh. And so because I didn't go home on weekends or things like that, that's how I really got involved in mm-hmm. campus events and things like that. And when I was graduating college, my thought was that I would go into my concentration with it in the business major was human resources. So I thought I would be in training and development or something like that mm-hmm. within an organization. Mm-hmm. And it was the early 90s. The economy wasn't great. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I interviewed and people, said, we wish we had jobs for you, but there really just weren't many jobs. And so I went home. But at the same time, my boss, the assistant director of the college union, she was leaving because her husband got a new job. So they were moving. And she said, you should apply here to be the assistant director. You would have tuition remission to get your master's. Mm-hmm. And I literally thought, wow, I had no idea how people got involved in higher education jobs. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so I did, and the rest is history in a lot of ways. And working at a smaller institution before mm-hmm. moving to these larger institutions was a really fantastic training ground mm-hmm. in terms of understanding how universities work, but also getting involved in a lot of the major campus events such as graduation and mm-hmm. accepted student days. Mm-hmm. And I managed the whole college union with my staff, which included a fitness center and
Oh,
a post
wow.
office and meeting rooms
Yeah.
and student activities and things like that. So it was really
That's amazing.
a lot of fun.
Yeah, absolutely. So, tell me a little bit more, like, since you mentioned it was a smaller institution, what was your college experience like? Were you very involved with a lot of activities,
Hmm.
kind of leading into your role as you just mentioned?
I mean, my main activity was working. So again, in those days, financial aid wasn't necessarily as prevalent as it was now. And I wasn't a first generation college student, but I was definitely low income. I was raised by a single mom. And so, she helped out as much as she could. But working was my primary, but which was really exciting because, again, it really got me involved in a lot of the campus activities. And then the community where the school was Chester, Pennsylvania. And so it was definitely, a lower income, probably similar to New Haven and parts of New Haven. So I was actually really involved in, it was called a Big Friends program, but it was along the lines of Big Brothers, Big Sisters. So they would bring in children from local churches and, once a week. And so, I really connected with them. I'm still friends with one of the girls, on Facebook. At this point, we haven't seen each other in several years, but,
great.
she and her family, I went to her high school graduation and things like that. So it was, really a lot of fun to connect with the community. And so I did a lot of things like that on campus and, just really like tutoring and those types of things to get involved in the community.
Oh, that's so awesome. And I'm curious about, since you mentioned that that you were first generation, or you were not a first gen, but that
Low income.
low income. And did you find it difficult to gain access to resources or find information when you were there? How was your experience with that?
It was just it's hard in this day and age where everything's online and there's the internet.
Right.
I mean, we didn't have, I still remember we had computer centers. So you had to go and type your resume there and you had it on a hard disk. And I remember the disk froze and freaked out. And I mean, it's just such a different experience to think about. So everything was paper and offices and going to, or trying to find resources, to help you, do those types of things. Yeah. So, I mean, even studying abroad, studying abroad now from a financial standpoint is typically more in line with what students would pay for tuition. There's a lot of equivalency. I wasn't able to study abroad. So I actually tell students that all the time. If they want to study abroad, I say, find a way to do it, because that was one of my biggest regrets from college, because it would have cost me, I think, twice as much as
it was really
what my semester tuition would have been. So I just couldn't afford to do that. So, I honestly don't even remember how I think we had to just rely on college fairs and things like that to find resources. And, FAFSA certainly wasn't a thing back then either. So, it was much different. Pell Grants,
different experience.
Pell Grant recipient and, all of that. So, and I definitely graduated with student debt.
Me too.
I worked for a few part-time jobs in addition to my full-time job after college to pay that off. And I was fortunate because going to the state school the first year, a lot was covered. And then because I took a year off and worked, I actually paid for my second year on my own.
Great.
So my student loans were really only my last 2 years, which felt very significant at the time. But
yes. I know. And it's so, I remember those days of the same thing. I worked on campus and had to figure out, like, okay, how am I going to pay for this when I finish, and all of those great things. And the reason I asked that question was just going back to that time. of course, I don't want to say our age, but but it sounds like around the same time, back then we had, the campus center. They would shove all these flyers into your mailbox.
Exactly.
And that's how you found out about whatever was going on. We didn't even have email at that time.
Oh, no.
So
we still typed memos.
You still type memos.
In the office. Even my first 6 years of professional work, we would type memos, and it was intercampus mail that got delivered.
Remember that? Oh, my gosh. And then we had 1 million mailboxes, and you had to go to your box every day to make sure you picked up your flyers. and if you didn't go through the flyers, then sometimes
you would miss out.
Yeah, you'd miss out if there was a career fair or whatever was going on. So it's really interesting, and I'm curious too about in terms of your college experience with like career advising. Did you find that were you more of a kind of go-getter when it came to that, or how was your interaction with?
I actually had a positive interaction. So it was a smaller campus, smaller office. I think I'm because of where I worked and just different events were held on campus. I'm sure the career service held meetings there. And so I became aware of it. But I did participate in, so they had career fairs on campus that I definitely participated in. And I did mock interviews, and I remember we actually videotaped them. And I remember that our dean of students was the person who was doing the mock interview. And it was right around the time when my boss had said she might be leaving and this job would be open. And so when he asked me what type of job, I actually used that as a job. And he didn't know she was leaving or anything. And so we did the mock interview. And then over the summer, 3 months later, when I was interviewing, he actually said, I don't actually need to interview her because I think she would be fine for it. So I actually took advantage of career services and thought the resources were very helpful.
That's awesome. That's so awesome. So how, when thinking of your experience as a college student then, and then, the awesome experience of moving right into that position, how do you apply things that you've learned back then into your current role?
I will often tell students there are no answers. I mean, and I'm sure even in my late teens, early 20s, I actually remember, I share this story with students a lot. My mother would say growing up, if something didn't happen that I wanted to, she would say, well, it just wasn't meant to be, which I found so frustrating as a 16, 17, 18-year-old. And then I graduated from college and didn't have a job and had to move home. And my mother she had been a teacher, trained teacher, but she didn't do that when I was growing up, and she had just gotten back into teaching. And so she was very busy, and my grandmother had already passed, but my grandfather ended up in the hospital. And so I spent those first 2 months after college just really helping him get settled. He had to transition to assisted living, and so I was taking him around and doing all of that. And it was right when we got him settled that I got the job in Pennsylvania. Wow. And there was just that light that said, it was meant to be. And I thought, oh gosh, yep, your mother's right.
Mom's right, yeah.
And really, it always comes back to that.
Yeah. Oh, that's so funny.
But I tell students that story. I said sometimes what you see as obstacles may actually be leading you to something you hadn't even imagined yet.
Yeah, it's so true. Yeah. And, you want things to happen right at that moment or when you want it to happen, but it doesn't. It just doesn't all the time. And you're right. You always wonder, okay, all of these experiences I'm having are leading up to me doing X, Y, Z, right? And it's Mom's right,
Right. Having patience, being persistent, doing the work.
Yeah, that's important too, right? It's continuing, to not get discouraged and just to keep, stay at it, or keep going through that process, whatever it is, until you get to that, whatever point it is that you're trying to, or whatever goal you're trying to reach. And so yeah, it's always funny when those little reminders go off. It's like,
I know.
they were right.
I mean, and all these years later, it's still just that very much aha moment. And it's funny. I just remember laughing at myself and thinking, okay, stop being so stressed and anxious all the time,
right.
because it may not work out sometimes, but
true.
Other times it will.
Yeah, it's so true. So I was curious if you could tell us a little bit more about your current role here at Yale. I know we talked about advising, but I know that you're involved with the STEM field, advanced degrees and STEM. So just tell us a little bit more about what your job entails and
Sure. So the Office of Career Strategy has gone through actually several iterations since I've been here and for 17 years. And when I started here, it was the undergraduate career services. And as a health professions advisor, so when I was at Hopkins, there was a pre-professional advising office. And then, but one thing I've learned is every college does it differently. Sometimes it's in academic department, sometimes it's in college advising offices, sometimes it's in career services. So at Yale, that's where it was. And the way our office was set up is we had a lot of general advisors, we had the employer relations team, and then there was the health professions team. And I was part of that. And so, I've been working with students all these years who are interested in med school, dental school, veterinary, public health, all those types of programs. And, and again, different schools provide different levels of service. But one thing I think is fantastic about Yale is that we will start working with students as soon as they arrive on campus and continue working with them when they're an alum. So I've had alums that have come back 10 years after graduation who weren't thinking of medical school at all. And for whatever reason, something happened in their life. Wow. And so it's nice to be able to be available to help them through that process. Because the one thing that keeps it interesting all of these years is that the admissions process for medical school and just the health professions is changing all the time. So you feel like you're always learning, which I really enjoy. And the one thing I try to stress to the students is there's certain benchmarks you have to meet, whether it's prerequisites or, those types of things. But it's really about your narrative. So, I will often say medicine encompasses all kinds of people. I mean, I've seen, people who are very extroverted that might end up as emergency medicine physicians to people who are very introverted that might end up in pathology. And then there's everything in between. So to me, that's one of the beauties of the health professions is that it can attract all types of students. So we work, everything from academic advising to helping them think about extracurricular activities, postgraduate plans if they're going to take some time before applying to medical school. And, I really feel like a lot of it is just, again, calming people down. And because everybody thinks, I got a B in a class and I'm never getting into medical school.
Oh, wow.
And so, my response is you may or may not get into medical school, but it's not going to be because of that B or a C even. Right. So, to really help them put things into perspective. And, because my first and foremost, I always tell students, think about what you want from college because you don't get 4 years like college and you don't get 4 years like college at Yale again. So, to really take advantage of those opportunities, health professions isn't going anywhere. So even if it's a couple of years after graduation, but you're able to have these amazing experiences in college, it's only going to make you a better human and healthcare provider in the future.
Yeah. Oh, that's so interesting. So I'm curious, so as you're advising students for these different fields, like how do you address or try to promote diversity and all of these things, like DEIB among students who are pursuing those areas? Like, is there outreach or how, or is it really just students who come to you, or how does that work?
It's a little bit of both. I mean, we certainly participate in admissions events, accepted student days, things like that. And then we we used to have it during orientation, but now over the summer, since we have moved to virtual
Yeah,
and a lot of things,
Right.
we have sessions for incoming students, to think about classes and activities, and then, definitely driving out newsletters and things like that. I mean, I always feel like pre-med or pre-health is a state of mind more than,
Really?
because other schools might actually collect that information. Like students have to check off whether
Really
they're going to be that, which, to me, it doesn't matter because I see students that come in thinking health professions and then find public health or some other type of field and go in that direction.
Yeah.
I actually remember a student apologizing to me one time.
Really?
She said, "I don't think I want to be pre-med anymore. I'm so
really?
sorry." And I'm like, "That's great
okay.
because you found your purpose."
Yeah.
And and that's another thing that I'll tell students, and because I don't know if I should say this on a podcast, but the find your passion, I feel like that's an overused phrase. And I feel like it puts entirely too much pressure on anybody, but certainly younger people.
Yeah.
Because I know I didn't know my passion at 20.
Right.
And it's really about finding your purpose. And that's even for right now. And that's something that can change and grow. And again, to me, that's what college is about, because you get to experience a lot of different things that may send you in a direction you hadn't predicted.
Yeah, exactly. When I think back to my college years, I mean, I was one of those people that I knew I wanted to be in technology, but I didn't know in what way or what aspect. And I can't imagine trying to make a life decision when you're early 20s and
Right.
What can you really decide at that point? And like you said, you need some time to think about it, or even take a year off, like you said, and do other things that kind of contribute to figuring that path out. So that's really interesting. So one thing I wanted to touch on, just because of our interaction with various projects that we've worked on together, and then again, going back to the comment I made earlier as we were coming in, we've been in the same building for a long time.
Right.
And we hadn't met until I think you had reached out to me. Yeah, like you reached out for some help on a project. And now hearing from you now, I'm like, we've been in the same building for years and we never met, And again, one of the great things about doing this podcast, but one thing that really struck me during one of our conversations was how you had mentioned that you volunteer. You do a lot of volunteer work. So I'm wondering if you can share a little bit more about your joy of giving time to various causes and activities. If you could tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. I mean, I've always been somebody who likes to get involved in the community in different ways, but in the last 15 years, it became very personal. So I was actually diagnosed with cancer in April 2008, stage 3 melanoma, which is a malignant form of skin cancer. And I had only been in Connecticut less than 2 years, and certainly grateful for being here. And luckily, everything worked out well.
Oh, good.
But I didn't know anything about the disease, and then since then, I've had other family members, including my mom, who've passed away from cancer, and other friends and things like that. And, and you really think about, or for me, I was really thinking about, like, how can I contribute? And so getting involved in cancer advocacy and, access to care. I mean, and this is certainly something I talk about with my students all the time who are interested in the health professions, or even going into STEM fields that might contribute to health professions, because technology and health is, really progressed in leaps and bounds. And when I was diagnosed, if you didn't qualify for a clinical trial, which I didn't, then there really was no treatment. I mean, the kind of joke in the cancer community was melanoma was the cancer that gave cancer a bad name, because there was just generally poor outcomes, especially in, later stages. And then it was, 2010, 2011 when more drugs in general started coming on the market, and, really through research and clinical trials. And, so that was kind of my entry, and, really advocating for research as, as well as diversity in clinical trials. I mean, only, cancer patients in general, only 5% of cancer patients participate in clinical trials. Oh, wow. There's usually so many stipulations on clinical trials, rightly to get things passed. But, we really need to look at more pragmatic ways to make them accessible to people who don't live near an academic medical center. Right. And my mother, she had an aggressive form of lymphoma. And so, again, that was just another entry point for research and, advocating for access to care. Wow. And so, but then, just from the patient perspective in general, I've done a lot of, different outreach with groups because to me, it's so important. I mean, it's hard. Healthcare is hard in this country, and it doesn't need to be. But, particularly people that live in rural areas and, and don't have access to specialists. I mean, there's some states that don't have specialists for certain, not even just cancers, but other diseases, and, are having to travel hours. And so, really just trying to amplify those voices so we can make it better for everyone.
Wow. That's a powerful story. Wow. And I didn't know that about you. And, I'm struck by that because, like you said, there are a lot of folks who don't have access to medical care or resources or knowing how to find, like you said, the clinical trials, things like that. And to share a little bit about just not my direct experience, but my experience was so my younger son actually had a lung condition before he was born.
Oh, wow.
And it was called a CCAM. So it was a cyst in his lung. And I forget what the statistics are for babies who have this condition, but initially it didn't seem, survival was iffy. Oh. And I mean, he's fine now. He's in 5th grade.
Right.
And but at the time, there wasn't a ton of information at all that they could provide regarding this condition. And eventually he had surgery at 6 months, and he's fine. But
it's still such a scary.
It was scary. And so during that time, I Googled like crazy. Thank God for Google now. But I'm just imagining, number one, when there was no Google, or no
all of the statistics on Google were terrible.
Yeah. And or folks who don't have access to find information. So long story short, I joined a Facebook group of a mom who had the same experience. Her child had the same experience, decided to create a Facebook group for parents.
Oh, wow.
And I was just blown away at, the women who would find, or parents who would find this group, just didn't have access to really anything, and like you said, had to travel out of state to find surgeons for this condition. And, I was just struck by the fact that I don't know what I would have done if I had to figure it out.
Exactly. And that's exactly the point. And that is actually the upside of social media is to find those connections now, because I found back many then, connections that way too. But I was, a young woman and relatively, and there weren't a lot of young women. There wasn't, at the time when I was first diagnosed, there wasn't even a support group locally. Yeah. And I found one at Yale Hospital, towards the end of my treatment, which was fantastic. But anybody with later stage disease was not surviving. And, it's only I actually had to stop going for a while because it was too devastating.
Yeah.
But then, again, as the treatments got better, but, to find those connections, that's exactly it. It's so hugely important. And even have gone to, Washington, D.C. to advocate with, our Congress people and things like that. But just hearing other people's stories from other parts of the country, similar to what you were experiencing, that some of these people just had no access or didn't know where to go, or it's not the medical debt issue is. I was actually just reading an article this morning about, increased medical debt for people, and they don't know how to handle it.
Right. Or like what resources there are, or how to even approach figuring out like, how do I pay for this, or or are there programs that can help me, or
and I don't even think, I think the first thing is to blame providers, but I don't even think the providers are aware of all of the resources, which is, again, some of the problem with the healthcare system and it being so dispersed in many ways, because I think the providers want to help, but, it really takes, but their time is, so administrative nowadays too. There's, we need kind of another level to really help like people navigate in between through almost,
that. Wow. I mean, that's amazing. And it's an ongoing problem, right? And like you said, it's like you need that sort of in between, like between the provider and patients, but also the resources that are out there to sort of, I don't know, have some sort of central, repository of all this stuff.
And again, all of my care providers at Yale were fantastic, but my oncology nurse, Molly Meyer, who is since retired,
oh really?
She was a force,
really?
and she. If it wasn't for her, I don't know what I would have done, because I was just completely clueless how to navigate the process in general. And she was like, nope, you need to do this, and nope, you need to talk to this person, and you need to do this. And
and how would you know if she didn't share that?
And then when my mom was sick, and then she was retired, and she was a retired teacher and had good health care, but because she had Medicare and then the separate plans, and all of the providers were not in one place, at Yale.
Yeah.
And she lived in Rhode Island, and I thought, honestly, this is why people die, because I felt relatively competent, but still so incompetent in so many ways in helping her navigate, the different approvals for scans and tests, and just seemed ridiculous.
So much info. Yeah, I can imagine, because so my dad passed away from myeloma a few years ago, and so he was sick for a very long time. My mother took amazing care of my dad, but she literally carried a binder.
So did I. Yes. Every time you walk into an office, you hand them the papers, and so they can make copies.
Right. And I mean, she was amazing. And to think one person was really handling all of that and keeping all of that straight. And, she would share it with us, but she was his caretaker, you know, and it's just so much put on the patient, and then the caretaker too.
The caregivers. And I've actually spoken to advocacy groups and said I've been both a patient and a caregiver.
Yeah.
And I actually think it's harder being the caregiver because as a patient, your job is to get better.
Yeah. Yeah.
As the caregiver, your job is everything else.
Right. It's that's a lot. So thank you for sharing that, so I know that sort of prompted you to want to give back. So what was like the first the first volunteer experience that you had after your own personal experience?
It was that few years after when the drugs started to come to market, and I found the Melanoma Research Foundation, which I'm pretty sure I was getting emails from them, but wasn't in a space to contribute. But they had these Hill Days, so they have them every year in March, and I just thought that was such a great opportunity to go and advocate, because a lot of the research comes from like government funded or like the defense budget in terms of research, because they can, take on more aggressive forms of research. But, it also benefits different types of cancers. And so I really, there have been some things like everybody's heard of Keytruda, and that's one on the market that certainly helps melanoma patients, but it helps many other types of patients. And it's come out of, a lot of these types of research. Wow. And so I just, think that's hugely important. And, and from there, it kind of, you learn more. And so military members are actually a population that's highly diagnosed with melanoma, because it's usually younger males that are going into areas that are very warm and, in the sun, and nobody's talking to them about skincare. And, there's so many things. So they actually have a very high rate of melanoma. And so, really advocating to help our service people in that way, which has led me to other organizations, that work with service people.
Oh, wow. And so what, is there a certain experience that really, I don't know, that really resonated with you during all of your volunteer experiences? Like, was there something that really just sticks out in your mind that, I don't know, just, gives you the warm fuzzies, or, or just.
Yeah, for me, it has been the advocating. So I've done the going to DC. So I've done that with a couple of different groups now.
Really?
So there's the National Cancer Survivorship Group, which it's like all of a sudden you get connected with one and you find all of these different groups.
Right.
And so I was down there with them last year, and the same type of thing, advocating with our Congress people for, a National Cancer Survivorship Act. I'm sure I'm not getting the acronym right, but, because again, with cancer patients and more younger people are being diagnosed, but you finish your care, and then most people don't have a care plan after. And, and when you're diagnosed with cancer at a younger age, you have a higher risk of developing, whether it's that cancer or a different type of cancer later on. And so, and then even just again in the healthcare system, you have your oncologist, and then a lot of people are forgetting to go to their primary care doctors or get their eye appointments.
Like all of the routine.
And that happened to me too. And
Really?
I actually ended up, with a like kind of weird eye thing after, and they thought it was caused by my treatment, but it wasn't. And, it's fine. But I hadn't gone to the eye doctor in probably 2 or 3 years, because I was in the middle of a cancer journey.
Yeah, it's like you're dealing with a lot.
So it's just kind of this coordination of things. And, and then after my mom passed 6 years ago, and, and that's where I got involved in the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society too. So, I've really kind of just found my space in that advocacy. And I think actually during COVID, because we were all home, I was reading a lot more and getting a lot more involved in, different organizations, or, whether I was doing online training or things like that, just because I had more time.
Right. And that's an amazing quality, because I think that, like you said, some people will go through that experience, and then maybe they don't follow up with appointments, or maybe they're not as involved as you are to advocate for patient patient trials, or clinical trials rather, and all of these things. And sometimes when I do see things like that or hear about them, I'm always amazed, because it's like, what would it be like if people like you weren't doing this kind of thing? And it's it's just amazing to have individuals like you who are willing to give up their time to do this, and it's just
thank you.
Awesome
if I'm being honest, some of it was survivor's guilt, because
Really?
like I said, even before my mom passed, I had two family members and one friend who passed within a year of different types of cancer, and they were all around my age. We were all in our mid-40s. Some of them were engaged or parents or grandparents. And I kept thinking, why them and not me? And I think that spurred me on a little bit too, because we were talking earlier about finding your purpose. Sometimes those things come to light, and I thought, if I'm able, then I just feel like I need to help be a voice for others. And again, we just don't know so much. Just with melanoma alone, certainly more people of Caucasian or lighter skin descent get diagnosed, but people of color get diagnosed and usually have worse prognosis because they don't notice it initially or don't get checked. And so, advocating, but it comes back to access to care, because things like going to a dermatologist, unless it's part of your health plan, which for most people it's not, they're not getting regular skin checks because they have to pay out of pocket for it. So, that's definitely, as an organization, one thing, we would love to push forward, and then certainly like tanning bed bans. And Connecticut's great because they ban for anyone under 18. So, which I think is hugely important. And a lot of it really just comes down to education, for all of this, and just how you get the word out.
Get the word out. Yeah. That's amazing. So I'm curious, do you find that, your experience with your personal experience, first of all, just what you went through with having cancer and getting through that, and then going into volunteerism, do you find that you pull from those experiences and how you approach your academic advising?
Absolutely. And it's definitely changed over the years. I think that is one of the nice things of age. I feel like I've seen things that I can share with students. So, one of the things that is really exciting to me is, when I am talking with students and trying to understand what they're interested in. And if I, know something about it through, my work, I'm always sharing resources with them to get involved. And, again, there's a lot of like online modules and things like that people can take for free. So, to share that with students, just so they can help become more knowledgeable about the healthcare space, if that's a career they want to go into. And, and so I've really seen some students take advantage of that over the years, and, or even, just personal experiences. I don't lead with, my health background, but if, if a student ever talks about it or had a family member or something like that, then, I can certainly empathize with them.
What's interesting about that is, for students who are, once they come to you and they're interested in this field, and, hopefully, or not, but for those who end up moving on into the field, into a STEM field, that your approach or sharing kind of influences their, I don't want to call it like bedside manner, but you know what I mean? Like just how they treat their patients, right? Like, have you ever had any students mention, how their interaction with you has sort of influenced their, their experience in working with patients?
Well, one example I remember from, it's actually one of my first years here at Yale, and I remember meeting with a student, and he was very interested in applying to MD, PhD programs. So, a bulk of the career would have been research, but he had zero clinical exposure, hadn't volunteered in a hospital or anything. And, I said to him, I'm like, well, you might want to just check it out, and to see if you like being around patients, even if you're looking at MD, PhD programs. And he did. And I remember he came back and all of a sudden changed his whole trajectory. He loved it so much.
Really?
He got involved in like 3 different types of clinical experiences. I think didn't end up going into MD, PhD, but really he was still an MD who ended up doing research. And, so been fun, you know, to
Yeah.
hear students, you know, do things like that.
Mhm.
And, you know, more recently, some resources I had shared with a student, she had reached out and, you know, had connected with an
Mhm.
organization and, you know, was looking to get involved a little
Yeah.
more. And, you know, so when they do things, like I more think of it as planting the seed.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
you know,
Exactly.
because the students are so busy and get involved in so many different things.
Right.
You know, but to always come back, you know,
Mhm.
I always say, you know, come back and talk at any time.
Mhm.
And actually, one of the most rewarding things recently was an alum, and she graduated probably 10 years ago.
Mhm.
And she went to med school in the Midwest,
Mhm.
and she had taken some time off before going, and we had talked a lot when she was a student, and she
Mhm.
emailed and she said, I'm at a crossroads. I'm
Mhm.
graduating, and you know, I would just love to talk to you because I just
Mhm.
remember talking with you, and
Oh, that's
that really
great.
just warmed my
Yeah,
heart.
that's awesome.
Um, and you know, and she'd gotten involved in some startups in healthcare, but she
Mhm.
ended up finishing med school, and now she's, oh gosh, she's got a big job in
Mhm.
healthcare in
Mhm.
a state. I think it's out in Oregon,
Mhm.
and you know, so I'd seen that on LinkedIn recently,
Oh,
and
that's so
you know, was
cool.
just so excited for her.
Yeah.
So you know, I like, I think most of the time I don't ever know the impact, if any,
Right,
that,
right.
you know, and I don't know if any of us do when we're working
Mhm.
with students, and
Mhm.
you know, but all that I can hope is that I've planted that seed,
Planted the
and you
seed.
know, and that it helps them
Right.
on
Yeah, in their journey, and that's kind of been a common theme that has come up in past episodes where, um, whatever seed you planted, right? Whether it's sharing your experience or just help guiding them in their decision making process of what they want to go into. Um, even though they may not come back and tell you, but
Mhm.
but I'm sure that some aspect resonates for them, that their experience with you is helped, right, and help them make in some ways it's a life decision in terms of what direction they want to go in,
Mhm.
and so that's been a common theme in terms of um, how we interact with students, even if it's like a small,
Right.
we think it's a small thing, but it really does influences their experiences, and that's a pretty cool thing. So,
Mhm.
um, yeah. So I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about I don't know, was there sort of a moment when you first began the advising uh, piece in your role here at the university? Like, was there sort of a pivotal moment that really struck you in terms of, I don't know, like your approach, or um, um, that sort of influenced your commitment to
Mhm.
helping students, and then it's kind of a two-part question, like um, in terms of what what you've experienced and everything you shared earlier, and in terms of DEIB, like how do you? Was there a moment where you felt like, okay, this is sort of a something that I want to make sure that I share with every single student in
Mhm.
their journey? So.
Yeah, well, one of the things, so many schools do this, and we did this at Hopkins, but you know, the process we have at Yale when, you know, students are starting to apply is
Mhm.
we have what we call the health professions applicant preparation. And it's really just a long form with
Mhm.
many questions that they'll fill out that doesn't go anywhere but our
Mhm.
office. And I always tell students it's more of a reflection for you so you can think about your journey, you know,
Mhm.
before applying to med school or whatever health professions you're going into.
Mhm.
And, you know, certainly over the years as I read those each year, and again, I think it kind of comes back to, you know, we don't know much about our colleagues if we don't see them regularly.
Right,
The
right.
same with students. I mean, students come in and, you know, might ask, well, which math class should I
Mhm.
take, or something like that. And it can
Mhm.
be very transactional.
Okay.
And then to read these documents and, you know, realize again that these students are coming from so many different backgrounds and experiences, and at such a young age, and I don't think they even realize how it's shaping them. And and so I really try to take the approach, even with first years coming in, just even if they want to know which math class they should take, that I'm trying to ask questions of how are things going, what types of activities are you getting involved in, to allow them that space to talk a little more and share more about themselves, and which helps me find that connection with them, and the things that they're interested in, and it helps me as an advisor as I see things that might come across my plate. Then somebody's, I can remember, I can forward this to somebody. It actually happened yesterday. I was talking with a student who, she was actually in the School of Public Health, so she wasn't, one of my direct students, but she was just asking some information about applying to med school. But, I knew her background was in, she had done a sign language as her language in college, and, and things like that. And I was on a meeting last night, and somebody was mentioning, I forget the organization's name, but it was, about like deaf health and, providing services for people who need it. And so just immediately I thought of her, but even so many of my other students, because we have a lot of Yale College students that take ASL. So, that's a resource that I'm going to share with students.
Oh, that's great.
And, and so for me, it's like finding these things that, again, might, connect with students.
Right. How do you keep track of all of these things? Just and of course, I'm asking from a techie from a techie perspective. But it's. I mean, well, a lot of students will ask questions over email, so I'll often do email searches to find out which students were asking, some of these questions, and try to connect them that way. And but I mean, just our system, where students make appointments, we can jot down little notes after, some of the things that we talked about. So, That's
I
awesome.
can do searches that way.
Yeah, because the reason I ask is just like, it's awesome that you have, you know what I mean? It's like, it's all up here, right? You have all these resources up here, and I'm just curious about, do you ever intersect with other departments, whether here at Yale College or outside of Yale College, that, are looking for those kinds of resources, and maybe
sometimes, I mean, we have graduate students in our office that send out faculty newsletters. So, we all have the opportunity to highlight some of these different interesting resources to try to connect with faculty. And I mean, I think it's so hard at larger institutions because everyone is so busy all the time. And I think people want to connect. But sometimes we don't think about the resources until we actually need them. And then go looking for them. And, and then there are student groups. And so, we try to help just in our office in general, a lot of, because I think the student-driven initiatives are best. So if we can help support them in any way, then I think it's a good learning experience for them, but then they're more invested as well.
Yeah, that's great. So I'm curious, have you noticed any kind of sort of trends, I guess? And I'm not as familiar with the, aside from tech, because I'm a techie, but have you noticed any trends in terms of student interests in STEM and their pursuits in their careers?
Definitely. I mean, Yale's made a big effort in recent years to increase STEM students in general, and we see a lot in our office. And, one of my colleagues has some good connections with the School of Engineering. Oh, wow. And so, again, trying to, filter that information and that she shares with all of us. And, some computer science, certainly. But again, from a student perspective, there have been, some students that have really taken it upon themselves this year to, generate some either career fairs or, things like that. And then, with help from our office. But yeah, students are definitely interested in engineering fields. And, and I think like more from a practical side. We've always had engineering graduates,
Yeah.
but, you know, a lot of times they may end up a little more in the business world. So,
Right.
You know, the words quantum computing get tossed around
Yes,
a lot. And, you know, so we're all
yes.
trying to
AI,
learn what
yeah.
that means. And
Right.
I mean, some of these fields are moving so fast.
I know, yes.
You know, but then New Haven has made great strides in recent years
Right.
to become more of a biotech space, you
Mhm.
know, outside of some of the larger cities like a Boston or San Francisco or things like that. So I think there's going to be, you know, some really interesting opportunities for students. And, you know, and of course, all of these things ebb and flow with the economy
Right. That's
too.
yes,
So it's,
yes.
you know, trying to, you know, keep track of those types of things also. But I do, you know, I think students are very interested in research still, but I always think historically there's been a separation between research and the corporate world or
Mhm.
business. And, you know, I feel like there's, you know, kind of more of a meshing of that nowadays.
Yeah,
And, you
yeah.
know, and students are interested in utilizing skills in a lot of different areas.
Wow, wow. So believe it or not, we're almost up on our hour.
Oh my
So
goodness.
it went by like that, right? Um, so yeah, I'm gonna just ask a few closing questions, and so just kind of looking ahead, you know, and as you know, I'm on the Yale College DEIB advisory committee, and you know, we're crafting our goals and action steps for the coming year, and I I would love to somehow incorporate, like, you know, the volunteer work and opportunities for that, right? Because I
Mhm.
know there have got to be other staff who are maybe have gone through similar experiences as you have, and have that interest, but maybe not sure where to start, or you
Sure.
know,
Yeah.
figuring out uh, you know, where they'd like to uh, commit their time and things like that.
Mhm.
So I'm curious, just from your perspective, like what would you like to see when it comes to whether it's uh, you know, some of our DEIB initiatives that we, you know,
Mhm.
discussed during our staff meeting a few months ago, or you know, just work that you enjoy, like the volunteer work that you enjoy. Like, do you see yourself sort of sharing that with staff a bit more? And
Sure. I mean,
so,
so the, you know, the funny thing was, when I was sick, again, you know, I told the people in my office I
right,
needed to tell,
that you need it, right?
but my life just
I know,
was
yeah,
so upended that, you
yeah,
know, I didn't really tell anybody else.
right.
And it wasn't, and, you know, and I've talked with other patients, cancer
Mm-hmm.
patients or other types of patients. And, you know, it wasn't that people wouldn't care. We knew
Mm-hmm.
that they would, but you, from a day-to-day basis, you never know how to answer the question, how
Mm-hmm.
are you?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so from a protection standpoint, but then when I
Yes,
really got
yes.
involved in advocacy work a few years later and was doing things, I thought I should probably because I still
Mm-hmm.
had coworkers I'd worked with now for several years that
Mm-hmm.
had no idea.
Yeah,
and
including me. Yeah.
and you know, so I'm certainly comfortable sharing it. But I
Mm-hmm.
mean, you know, listening to the previous podcast that you've
Mm-hmm.
done, I think just learning again about the diversity of experiences of
Mm-hmm.
staff and,
Yeah.
you know, having that in one place, so you know,
Right.
people can reach out to learn more or ask
Yeah.
questions or you know, just hear about that, because I think
Mm-hmm.
that's, you know, really makes such the rich tapestry of,
Yes,
you know,
yes.
Yale College
It
and
does.
Yale in general.
Mhm.
You know, because yeah, otherwise people just wouldn't know
Mhm, mhm.
unless you
Yeah.
stumble across somebody.
Right, right. It's so true. And you know, even in terms of our interaction, I definitely wouldn't have known. And um I can't even remember how the topic came up. I think we were just getting on a Zoom call,
Hmm.
and you happened to mention, "Oh, I went here during winter break, you know, last year,"
Right,
right?
right, yeah.
And that's how I started learning about, oh wow, like that's really fascinating that you spent your break doing volunteer work, which I found to be so, you know, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Um, I'm wondering, you know, if you could offer, I guess, a piece of advice whether it's to students or even staff who want to contribute more to this, this inclusive environment that we're trying to, I don't want to say build, that we're trying to enhance. What would it be if you had an idea?
I mean, I think we all need to be curious.
Yeah.
And I mean, just as guilty probably of everybody else. You get caught up in your daily lives and things are busy and things break at home and
right. Yes. Yeah.
whatever the
over.
thing is.
Yeah.
And, but I think we're all better when we can, step back and reach out and have conversations and, and I feel like, we've had the combination, certainly in Yale College, of in-person and Zoom meetings, but I actually think that's been good because, sometimes we have breakout rooms and I'm often in the breakout rooms with people I've never met before. And then when I see them at an in-person meeting,
you're more likely to say hi.
So, which has definitely happened in the last couple of years since we've been back on campus after COVID, because I was definitely in more Zoom meetings with staff people. And so, and I think, which is, just led to participating or going to other events on campus that I wouldn't have otherwise known about because I've connected with these people. And
that's awesome.
so, I think that's probably just the tip for all of us to remember to, try to step out, and certainly not every week because everyone's busy, but if, once a quarter, if you're going to try to do something else and make that commitment for yourself.
Right. I agree. Because there are so many, what was it I saw the other day? It was a tour. I think it was from a newsletter I received, and it was like a tour of the Klein building. And I said, oh my gosh, that would be so cool to check that out, because I've driven by it probably a million times and have never even been inside.
Right.
And I thought, so opportunities like that.
And I know some people in my office have done things like that, like the tours of the Carillon bells and those types
I haven't done that either, which I'd love to.
Right.
So that's neat. And it's one of those little ideas I'd love to put down. Like if it's hey, if you want to sign up and have this group tour and we all go do something, take one afternoon in a month to do something on campus and venture out and see some other part of campus. And I think that would be a nice way to connect somehow, because like you said, we're remote or hybrid, and it's so hard otherwise, right? And we have lives, and other stuff comes up. But I think that would be wonderful if we had something like that. So now I hate to wrap up because I want to know more about you, but we have to. So, but my last question, just reflecting on your journey up to this point and your experiences, is there a particular accomplishment that you're most proud of, whether it's in your current role or prior role, or your volunteerism? Is there something that really stands out for you?
I mean, my journey in higher education, and I will tell students this because I started more in the student activities, event space, and have wound my way more into advising and counseling space. But all of that along the way, I try to share that with students because it's been such a learning experience, and I feel like I'm always continuing to learn. And even in recent years, as I've gotten more involved in STEM career advising, I was always in the health professions advising space. So, I'm still learning, about the career space. And, so I think for myself, something that I feel proud of is that, I try to be open and say yes when learning opportunities come. And because again, I think when I was much younger and would get very frustrated and I would close myself off and really being open to these experiences is makes for an amazing journey. And and I think again, listening to other podcasts, but even, talking with students, that's the thing that excites me most is,
Really?
I think I'm probably one of the things I'm most proud of. I hope that I'm, a listening ear for students in whatever capacity that they need.
Right.
And, and I've always felt, for young people, and even when I was their age coming out of college, I tried to do that. And, and I just have continued that.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I think that's, it's important, right? Whether it is for students or even getting to know you as my colleague, I would be more comfortable, just having a conversation with you and all of these things that you shared about your journey. I think would it pulled me in terms of just like now that I know these things about Kristin. I don't know. It makes me feel more comfortable and having that safe space, and I think that's important. So thank you so much for sharing that.
This was so enjoyable.
Yeah, I appreciate the time, and I wish we had more time because I told you it goes by so fast.
It really
right?
does.
But Kristin, I just want to thank you so much for joining me today and sharing more about your journey and
and thank you for doing this podcast.
No,
I think it's a great service for Yale.
Awesome. I appreciate that. I always say to my guests, like, it kind of happened by accident, but I've come to really enjoy it because it gives me an opportunity to get to know my guests and just realizing this is my 16th year here at Yale and just realizing what awesome people I get to work with and all of these different backgrounds and experiences and it's pretty amazing. I just want you to know, like, I appreciate you.
Thank you. We appreciate you too.
Well, thank you. So yeah, we're going to end here. And I always end with letting you know it will be on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. We're also on SoundCloud, and you can check us out on Instagram. So Yale College Voices. And just thank you again so much for your time today, Kristin. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. And we'll end now.